Noah and Elena were only 8 years old when they made a promise that would eventually change both of their lives. They lived next door to each other and had been best friends since they were little. Every afternoon after school, they would meet beneath an old tree behind Elena's house, where they would spend hours talking about things that only made sense to children. Noah dreamed of becoming a pilot one day, while Elena wanted to become a writer and travel the world. They had no idea how difficult life could become. To them, the future was just a place where all their dreams would somehow come true. One afternoon, Elena was unusually quiet. Instead of talking about school or teasing Noah, she sat beneath the tree with her knees pulled close to her chest. Noah noticed immediately and asked her what was wrong. Elena hesitated before telling him that her parents had been fighting again. She was tired of hearing them argue every night, and she was afraid that one day she might grow up and have the same kind of unhappy life. Noah didn't know how to solve a problem that big, but he wanted to make her feel safe. He told her that she would never become like them and that one day she would have the happy life she deserved. Elena looked at him and asked, "But what if we grow up and stop being happy too?" Noah thought about it for a moment. Then, with the seriousness only a child could have, he held out his little finger and said, "Then we'll promise to let each other go." Elena looked confused, but Noah explained that if they ever became unhappy together, they wouldn't force each other to stay. They would be brave enough to walk away. Elena smiled and hooked her little finger around his. "Promise," she whispered. Neither of them knew that those simple words would stay with them for the next 20 years. As the years passed, Noah and Elena grew up together. Their friendship became stronger with every passing year. They were there for each other's birthdays, school events, family problems, exams, failures, and dreams. Noah was the first person Alana called when she received good news, and Alana was the first person Noah searched for whenever something went wrong. Somewhere between childhood and adulthood, their friendship quietly changed into love. By the time they were 17, everyone around them could see what they refused to admit. Noah looked at Elena differently, and Elena's face always changed whenever Noah walked into the room. One evening, they were sitting beneath the same old tree where they had made their childhood promise. Noah finally gathered enough courage to tell her what he had been keeping inside for years. He looked at her and said, "I think I've loved you for a very long time." Elena smiled, her eyes filling with tears, and softly replied, "I know." From that moment, they became a couple. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real. They studied together, went on long walks, shared headphones, argued over silly things, and made plans for the future. Noah still wanted to become a pilot, and Elena still wanted to become a writer. They talked about traveling together, having a small house, and growing old in a place where nobody could tell them what their lives should look like. Whenever they talked about their future, they laughed about the promise they had made as children. It had become nothing more than an old memory. But after college, everything began to change. Noah received an opportunity to study aviation in another city. It was the first major step toward becoming a pilot, and Alana was incredibly proud of him. Around the same time, Alana received a scholarship to attend a prestigious writing program overseas. They were both excited, but for the first time. Their dreams were taking them in completely different directions. They promised that distance wouldn't change anything. At first, they managed to make it work. They called every night and talked about their days. Noah would tell Elena about his flight training, while Elena would read pieces of her writing to him over the phone. But slowly, life became more complicated. Noah's training became demanding, and Elena's writing program took up most of her time. Their calls became shorter. Messages were answered hours later. Little misunderstandings started turning into arguments. One night, they had a terrible fight over something that neither of them would remember years later. Elena was exhausted, Noah was frustrated, and both of them said things they didn't truly mean. After the call ended, Elena sat alone in her apartment, staring at an old photograph of the two of them beneath the tree. Then she remembered their promise. She whispered to herself, "If we aren't happy anymore, we have to let each other go." The next day, she called Noah. He answered immediately, but the moment he heard her voice, he knew something was wrong. Elena tried to explain that she didn't think their relationship was working anymore. Noah told her they were simply going through a difficult period and that they could fix it. But Elena kept returning to the same words. "We promised each other." Noah's heart sank. He reminded her that they had been children when they made that promise. "Elena, we were 8 years old. We didn't know what love was." She was crying now. "Maybe we didn't. But we promised." Noah wanted to fight for her. He wanted to tell her that he still loved her and that they could get through anything. But deep down, he was afraid too. What if Elena was right? What if they were holding on to a relationship that was slowly making both of them unhappy? What if loving someone meant knowing when to let them go? So, after hours of talking and crying, they made the most painful decision of their lives. They broke up. There was no cheating, no betrayal, no hatred. Just two young people who still loved each other, but believed they were keeping a promise they had made as children. After the call ended, Noah sat alone in his room and stared at the old photograph of them beneath the tree. Elena did the same from thousands of miles away. Neither of them knew that this would not be the end of their love. It would only be the beginning of 10 years of missing each other, pretending to move on, and secretly wondering what might have happened if they had ignored one little promise from childhood. Because sometimes the hardest person to forget is the person you never stopped loving. For a few seconds after Elena answered the call, neither of them spoke. They simply listened to each other breathe. 10 years had passed since they had last heard each other's voices, yet somehow, the silence between them felt strangely familiar. Elena was sitting at her desk with tears slowly filling her eyes, while Noah stood beside the hotel window, staring at the city lights below. Finally, Noah whispered, "Hi, Elena," she smiled through her tears. "Hi, Noah." Those two simple words brought back everything. Their childhood afternoons beneath the tree, their first date, their late-night conversations, the promises they had made, and the painful night when they had decided to walk away from each other. For several minutes, they talked about ordinary things because neither of them was brave enough to mention what was really on their minds. Noah asked about her writing. Elena asked about his flying career. They laughed when they realized how different their lives had become. But eventually, the conversation became quiet again. Then, Elena asked the question she had been carrying for 10 years. "Did you ever stop loving me?" Noah didn't hesitate. "No." Elena closed her eyes. "I didn't either." There was no anger in her voice, only sadness. Noah told her that he had spent years convincing himself that their breakup had been the right thing. He had believed that because they had promised to let each other go if they ever stopped being happy, they had done the mature thing by walking away. But as the years passed, he realized something. They hadn't stopped loving each other. They had simply stopped knowing how to handle the distance, the pressure, and the fear of losing each other. "We were so young," Noah said. "We thought love was supposed to be easy. The moment it became difficult, we thought it meant it wasn't meant to be." Elena quietly replied, "And we let an 8-year-old version of ourselves decide our entire future." They both laughed sadly. That was the painful truth. The promise had been made by two children who knew nothing about adult relationships, yet two adults had allowed that promise to control their lives for almost 10 years. Noah asked Elena if she regretted leaving him. She remained silent for a moment, every day. Noah looked down, "Me too." They decided to meet. A week later, Noah flew back to the city where they had grown up. Elena waited for him outside the old coffee shop near her house. When she saw him walking toward her, everything around her seemed to slow down. He looked different, older, more mature. But somehow, still Noah. He stopped a few feet away. For a moment, neither of them knew what to do. Then Elena smiled. "You still look nervous." Noah laughed. "And you still notice everything." They hugged. It wasn't the kind of hug they had shared when they were 17. It was slower, quieter, and filled with 10 years of everything they had never said. Afterward, they walked toward the old tree behind Elena's house. The tree was still there, older now, with thicker branches and rougher bark, but somehow it felt exactly the same. They sat beneath it. Elena looked at the ground and said, "This is where we made the biggest mistake of our lives." Noah smiled. Maybe he reached into his jacket and pulled out something small. It was an old photograph, a picture of the two of them as children sitting beneath the tree. Elena stared at it in disbelief. "You kept that?" "I kept everything." Her eyes filled with tears. She admitted that she had kept his old letters too. Noah laughed and told her that he had kept the ticket from their first movie date. They realized that while they had spent years pretending to move on, neither of them had actually let go. But there was still a problem. They weren't 17 anymore. Noah had a demanding career that required him to travel constantly. Elena had built a life around her writing. They lived in different countries and had responsibilities they couldn't simply abandon. For the first time, they understood that love alone couldn't solve everything. So Noah asked her, "What do we do now?" Elena looked at him. "I don't know." He nodded. "But I know what I don't want." "What?" "I don't want to spend another 10 years pretending I don't love you." Elena smiled. "Neither do I." They didn't immediately promise marriage. They didn't promise forever. They didn't make another childish promise. Instead, they decided to try. This time, they would talk when things became difficult. They would tell each other when they were scared. They wouldn't make decisions for each other. And most importantly, they wouldn't walk away simply because things became hard. Months passed. Their relationship wasn't perfect. They argued. They struggled with distance. There were nights when Noah was thousands of miles away and Elena wished he were beside her. There were moments when Elena wondered if they were making the same mistake again. But this time, they talked. And every time one of them became afraid, the other reminded them that they were no longer those two frightened teenagers beneath the tree. They were adults. They could choose. Eventually, Elena moved closer to Noah, not because she was sacrificing her dreams, not because he asked her to, but because they had finally learned how to build a future together instead of deciding one for each other. One evening, years after their reunion, Noah and Elena sat beneath the same old tree. Noah looked at her and smiled. "Do you remember what we promised when we were 8? Elena laughed. "How could I forget?" He took her hand. "We were so sure we knew what love was." Elena rested her head on his shoulder. "We didn't." "No." He looked at her. "But I think we finally do." Elena smiled. This time, they didn't make a promise about staying together forever. They didn't promise that they would never fight. They didn't promise that life would always be easy. They simply promised to keep choosing each other. Because sometimes, the person you lose isn't someone you stopped loving. Sometimes, you lose them because you were too young to understand what you had. And sometimes, life gives you a second chance not to return to the past, but to create the future you were never mature enough to choose the first time. Noah and Elena had spent 10 years believing their childhood promise had ended their love story. In the end, they discovered something much more important. Some promises are made by children, but some choices are meant to be made by adults. And this time, they chose each other. After Noah and Elena ended their relationship, both of them believed the pain would eventually disappear. They thought that with enough time, new places, new people, and new dreams, they would forget what they had once meant to each other. But they were wrong. The first few months were the hardest. Elena stopped looking at their old photographs because every picture reminded her of what she had lost. She removed Noah's messages from her phone, packed his gifts into a box, and pushed the box to the back of her closet. She told everyone that she was fine, but every night when she was alone, she missed him. Noah wasn't doing any better. During his flight training, he kept himself busy from morning until night. He studied, trained, flew, and spent as little time alone as possible. His friends thought he was focused on his career, but the truth was that he was trying not to think about Elena. Sometimes, during long flights, he would look down at the lights of distant cities and wonder whether she was somewhere beneath the same sky. Neither of them reached out. They had made a promise, and both were too stubborn and too hurt to be the first person to break it. Years passed. Noah eventually became a professional pilot. He traveled from country to country, stayed in expensive hotels, saw beautiful places, and built the career he had dreamed about since childhood. From the outside, his life looked perfect. But whenever he returned to an empty apartment after a long flight, the silence reminded him of the one person who wasn't there. Elena became a successful writer. Her first novel was published when she was 26, and unexpectedly, it became a bestseller. People praised her ability to write about love, heartbreak, and memories so realistically that readers felt as though they were living the stories themselves. But there was something nobody knew. Almost every love story Elena wrote was secretly influenced by Noah. She never used his name. She changed the places, the characters, and the circumstances. But the emotions were always real. The loneliness of missing someone, the pain of walking away, the fear of loving someone you could never forget. One night, Elena was sitting at her desk working on another novel when she stopped typing. She looked at the empty chair across from her and suddenly wondered what Noah was doing. It had been almost 10 years. She searched his name online for the first time. There were pictures of him standing beside airplanes, photographs from different countries, and interviews about his career. He looked older now, more confident. But Elena recognized his smile immediately. She closed the laptop. She told herself she was only curious, but she knew the truth. She still loved him. Noah had moments like that too. On one of his flights, a passenger left a book behind. The cover caught his attention because he recognized the author's name. Elena. He stood there holding the book for several minutes. He hadn't heard her name in years. That evening, he searched for her work. He discovered that she had become a successful author. He read an interview where she was asked what inspired her stories. Elena had answered, "Sometimes the people we lose become the stories we carry with us." Noah stared at the sentence for a long time. He wondered if she was talking about him. Then he laughed quietly at himself. 10 years had passed. She had probably forgotten him. So he closed the page. But he didn't delete it. Neither of them moved on in the way they had expected. They dated other people. Elena had a relationship that lasted almost 2 years, while Noah dated a woman he genuinely cared about. But both relationships ended for the same reason. Something was missing. Noah's girlfriend once asked him, "Do you still love someone else?" He didn't answer, but his silence was enough. Elena's boyfriend asked her a similar question. "Is there someone you never got over?" She looked away. Maybe, eventually, both relationships ended. And once again, Noah and Elena were alone. But neither contacted the other. Until one rainy afternoon, almost 10 years after their breakup, Noah walked into a small bookstore during a layover. He wasn't looking for anything specific. He simply wanted somewhere quiet to spend a few hours before his next flight. Then he saw a familiar name on a display table. Elena Carter. His heart immediately started beating faster. He picked up the book. The title was The Promise We Made. Noah stared at it. The story was about two childhood friends who fell in love, separated because of a promise they had made as children, and spent years secretly missing each other. He began reading the first few pages. The similarities were impossible to ignore. A tree. A childhood promise. Two people who loved each other but believed they had to let go. Noah's hands began to shake. He turned to the dedication page. There was only one sentence. For the person I never stopped writing about. Noah closed the book. He knew. It was about him. For the first time in 10 years, Noah allowed himself to admit the truth he had been avoiding. He had never stopped loving Elena. He bought the book and walked out of the store. That night, he sat in his hotel room with the book beside him. He opened his phone. Elena's number was still there. He had never deleted it. He had never called it either. His thumb hovered over the screen. He knew that one message could change everything. Maybe she had moved on. Maybe she hated him. Maybe she was married. Maybe he had waited too long. But after 10 years of silence, Noah finally decided he couldn't spend the rest of his life wondering. He typed, "I read your book." He stared at the message. Then he pressed send. Thousands of miles away, Elena was sitting at her desk when her phone suddenly vibrated. She looked down. Her heart stopped. She recognized the number immediately. For 10 years, she had never deleted it either. She opened the message. "I read your book." Elena's eyes filled with tears. She could have ignored it. She could have pretended she didn't care. Instead, she typed the only thing she could think of. "Did you like it?" A few seconds later, Noah replied. "I liked the ending." Alana stared at the screen. Then another message appeared. "But I still don't like how our story ended." For the first time in 10 years, Alana smiled. And then her phone rang. Noah was calling. She looked at his name on the screen, her hands trembling. She had spent 10 years wondering what she would say if she ever heard his voice again. Now she finally had the chance. Elena took a deep breath and answered.